Welcome to our channel. Today, we will embark on a journey to discover the shocking truth that Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe have just revealed about the mysterious death of Frank Fritz. The shocking secrets and hidden corners that have never been revealed will make you unable to take your eyes off. Don't miss a single moment. Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe finally break their silence, revealing the shocking truth behind Frank Fritz's death. Are the rumors true? What dark secrets have been hidden all this time? Join us in uncovering the truth and discovering the never-before-revealed details below. If you find this story interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next secrets. Leave a comment with the number 0 if you believe there are more truths hidden, or the number 1 if you believe all have been exposed. Thank you for accompanying us. This was never supposed to happen, not under the flashing lights of cameras, not in a courtroom where reality felt colder and murkier than any TV drama would dare to portray. For over a decade, Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe were trusted faces in American households, symbols of a bygone era filled with rusty treasures and dusty antiques. They laughed, bargained, and shook hands with strangers across the country, searching for stories hidden behind barn doors and market stalls. But what happened just a few days ago shattered that image completely. The men who once hunted for historical relics have now become the center of history themselves, but this time for all the wrong reasons. At exactly 10:43 a.m., in a packed courtroom in Nevada, the silence was broken. Not by the strike of the judge's gavel or a lawyer's objection, but by two voices the world had never heard quite like this before. There were no rehearsed lines, no staged negotiations, only trembling, choked words filled with shame and deep regret. We did it together. The confession hit like a shockwave, first sweeping across the courtroom, then reaching the entire world. Rick Harrison, the sharp pawn shop owner famous for his trademark smile and sharp business sense. Mike Wolfe, the rugged man with a heart for history and a keen eye for forgotten gems. Together, they were household names, trusted and beloved by millions. But now they are known for something entirely different. The courtroom video that spread like wildfire captured their joint confession to one of the most shocking crimes of the decade: the death of reality TV star Frank Fritz. It wasn't just the confession itself that left the nation in shock, but the way they said it. There were no lawyers standing in front of them, no whispered advice to plead the fifth. It was as if a dam inside both of them had finally burst. Rick's voice cracked midway through his sentence. Mike couldn't lift his eyes from the glossy wooden floor. He whispered, "He was our brother, but we just couldn't take it anymore," as reporters in the courtroom scribbled frantically. "We didn't mean to kill him, but we did." And just like that, the facade was broken. Millions of fans who had watched Pawn Stars and American Pickers were stunned, their mouths hanging open. They were no longer just reality TV personalities. Now they were prime suspects in the death of the man they once called a friend. But it didn't happen all of a sudden, not really. Whispers had long echoed in fan forums and tabloid headlines about tensions between Frank and others. Off-camera spats, quiet feuds, failed business deals. And then, the most haunting event. Frank Fritz disappeared from the public eye without explanation. No finale, no farewell post, just gone. The world speculated. Illness, retirement, Or something more serious? Then the leaked footage emerged, initially just blurry images, shared from an account with no followers. One clip showed Rick raising his hands in court, then another of Mike shaking, nodding in agreement. And then, the phrase exploded across TikTok, Twitter, and cable news channels in minutes. "We both ended his life." You didn't have to be a reality TV fan to feel the weight of those words. You just had to be human. If you are also caught up in this mysterious story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next developments. Leave a comment number 2 if you believe the truth is deeper than what we know. Or number 5 if you think all the secrets will be revealed. Let's wait and see what awaits ahead. What followed was a digital firestorm. Hashtags spread around the world. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. Experts were invited on CNN, even late-night hosts, usually eager for jokes, reported in somber tones. But the courtroom was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. There was more, much more. In this video, we explore it all. From the trio's rise to fame, to the years of silent resentment, to the shocking events that led to Frank's final moments. You'll see what investigators uncovered, what witnesses said, and what Rick and Mike confessed behind closed doors before the cameras rolled. Because this isn't just a crime story, it's a story of betrayal, fame, greed, silence, and how it all comes crashing down when the lights come up and the truth can no longer hide behind staged smiles. Ask yourself, what would make two men who had it all, fame, fortune, legacy, walk into a courtroom and throw it all away with 8 simple words? The courtroom was packed, but it felt like a vacuum. A heavy atmosphere hung in the air that no one could see but everyone could feel. The rows were filled with journalists, former colleagues, loyal fans, and shocked family members. Their faces were pale, frozen in disbelief and fear. Some looked to each other for comfort. Others stared straight ahead, waiting for someone, anyone, to say it was all a misunderstanding. But there was no such comfort, no moment of humor, no just kidding moment to salvage the situation. Because what Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe just admitted is not something that can be dismissed as a PR stunt or a misquote. The words were not shouted, not rehearsed, and did not need to be. The truth was heavy and quiet. No matter how softly they spoke, the words echoed through every corner of the courtroom and far beyond the walls. "I pushed him first," Rick whispered. Mike's reply was barely audible. "And I didn't stop him." That was the moment everything in the room changed. The judge's gavel came down, but the silence that followed echoed louder than anything else. Everyone in the room knew, instinctively, that what they had just heard was irrevocable. It was more than an emotional meltdown, less than a negotiating tactic. It was a crack in the dam that had held back years of resentment, guilt, and buried secrets. Finally, it broke. What followed wasn't chaos or screams or panic. It was something more haunting: acceptance. It was as if the crowd understood that this was real, permanent, and all they could do now was bear the weight of it. Outside, the world continued to spin, but in that courtroom, time stood still. Before the confession, everyone thought they knew Rick and Mike. They were the rugged but lovable TV stars who traded old bikes, gas pumps, vintage signs, and old jukeboxes for money and stories. Frank was the charming oddball, the comedic element, the emotional thread that kept the show human. Together, they traveled thousands of miles and touched millions of viewers. They were supposed to remind America that history mattered, that every object had a story. But now that story had changed. No longer a television story, but a crime story. And viewers wondered, the question that kept many awake at night: how did we not notice? There were signs, to be sure. Frank's abrupt absence from American Pickers was attributed to health issues. Rick's increasingly public struggles were dismissed as the hardships of fame. Mike's obvious discomfort when asked about Frank in interviews was often dismissed as a desire for privacy. But now, looking back at every clip, every interaction, every offhand remark, it all takes on a different hue, darker, more pointed. This wasn't a case of sudden madness or a bad decision. This was something that had been brewing, quietly, for years. What began as a rift in a friendship had widened into a rift that tore apart a man's life and ended it. Frank Fritz was no stranger to hardship. Friends say he battled addiction, depression, and the pressures of fame. He was in and out of medical facilities, and rumors about his mental state were whispered among industry insiders. But against all odds, Frank tried to make a comeback. He had plans, wanted to reclaim his place on screen, wanted to tell his own story. But he never got the chance. What happened between the three men in the months before his death remains unclear, but investigators later said Frank had uncovered something, a financial misstep, a buried secret, perhaps a betrayal, that made him a danger to others. As egos swelled and communication collapsed, confrontation became inevitable. When the truth finally came to the public, it didn't come from the mouths of journalists or the results of an investigation. It came straight from Rick and Mike, each confessing, each confirming what had previously existed only in the shadows. There was no dodging of details, no press release to soften the impact. Just a video, a raw, unedited clip from inside the courtroom, shared and reshared until it became the most viewed viral video of the week. Some called it the moment reality TV truly came to terms with reality. Others simply called it the fall of two American icons. As this video continues, we'll dissect what led to this tragic confession. We'll dissect the fractured relationships, the secrets that simmered, and the moment when it all came crashing down. You'll hear directly from witnesses, see evidence that has never been made public before, and walk through the lengths investigators went to in piecing together a story that's more shocking than fiction. For Frank Fritz's death was not just a personal loss, but a national awakening, a reminder that no matter how perfect the image, no matter how famous the face, darkness can exist just beneath the surface, waiting for its moment. So, if Rick and Mike had not spoken out, would we ever have known the truth? Was Frank just another tragic disappearance? Or worse, would the truth have died with him? Prepare yourself, because everything you thought you knew about these men will be dismantled piece by piece, and by the end of the story, one thing will become chillingly clear. Frank isn't just gone, he's erased. Before the confessions, before the viral videos, before the headlines screamed murder, there was a story of friendship, a brotherhood. Rick Harrison, Mike Wolfe, and Frank Fritz were more than just business partners or television colleagues. They were a cultural phenomenon. To understand how it all fell apart, you have to go back to when it all came together. It all started with a shared passion, the thrill of the hunt. Rick Harrison has carved out a niche in pop culture with Pawn Stars, which has been on the air since 2009. The show, which is filmed in Las Vegas, is a mix of business, history lesson, and family sitcom. Viewers are drawn to Rick's analytical mind, dry humor, and ability to turn an old item into a serious profit. Rick is a deal-maker, a skeptic, and can spot a fake in seconds. Meanwhile, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz appeared on screen in American Pickers in 2010. While Rick hunts from behind the counter, Mike and Frank travel to farms, barns, and basements in rural America. They're not just buying antiques, they're saving memories. Where Rick brought the business savvy, Mike and Frank brought the heart. Mike's high energy and charm, and Frank's humor and down-to-earth personality were the perfect contrast. Together, they became staples of the History Channel lineup. For a while, everything was perfect. Pawn Stars and American Pickers became part of a television empire. The three men not just stars, but symbols of a nostalgic America. A place where old stuff mattered, where stories were currency, and where handshakes meant something. But then, as fame came, tensions began to arise. Frank, though beloved by his fans, sometimes felt like an extra. Rick and Mike, both strong personalities, naturally gravitated toward each other. Their business acumen meshed, and their visions of growth and legacy were similar. Frank, meanwhile, just wanted to be on the road, looking for people, for stories. He didn't want the business, the branding, the glitz. He just wanted to be authentic, and sometimes that came at a price. According to sources, tensions began to simmer in the early 2010s. Little things started to happen. Frank missed a promotional shoot. Mike went to interviews alone. Rick allegedly cut Frank out of a project together. The cracks grew as personal issues surfaced. Frank opened up about his health struggles, alcohol problems, and the effects of constant travel. But instead of sympathy, he was met with distance. Rick was focused on expanding the brand. Mike was dealing with a personal life that included a divorce and his own business ventures, and Frank seemed to be slipping away both publicly and privately. The relationship began to change irrevocably in 2015. Behind closed doors, the three engaged in a silent war over a major deal, a collection of vintage motorcycles worth more than $2 million. The deal fell through. Lawsuits were avoided, but relationships were damaged. According to a former channel executive, it was a turning point. The deal turned friends into rivals. From then on, their relationship became transactional. Appearances became contracts, smiles became scripts, and behind the camera, they stopped talking to each other altogether. Fans, however, had no idea. That's the thing about reality TV. It's often not real. As American Pickers continued, Mike began to make more solo appearances. By 2020, Frank was no longer a regular presence. His absences were explained away with vague excuses about health and recovery issues. The truth was more painful. Frank was pushed out, not with words, but with silence. He reportedly reached out to Rick for help, whether it was financial, emotional, or just a phone call. Rick didn't respond. Not once. According to Frank's close friends, it was this silence that devastated him more than any lost income or show contract. He felt discarded, forgotten, replaced. That's when the rumors began. Frank told a friend that he believed there was something going on, that Mike and Rick had been working behind his back on real estate deals, antiques storage, and partnerships that had originally been promised to all three. Frank allegedly had evidence, documents, emails, and records that could expose them. But whether those documents actually existed or were just the desperate words of a man pushed too far, We will probably never know. What we do know is that Frank disappeared from public view. No interviews, no social media, no appearances. His last public appearance was a brief visit to an antiques fair in Iowa, where witnesses said he looked thin, quiet, and nervous. Then, nothing. Until now, until the courtroom, when Rick and Mike stood side by side, looked out at a nation holding their breath, and said what no one expected. We're finished, both of us. The confession raised more questions than it answered. What did they mean? Was it physical? Was it abandonment? Did they plan it? Or was it just a moment of anger that escalated? And why now? Why speak up after so many years of silence? Some believe that guilt finally caught up with them. Others believe it was a legal strategy, an attempt to get ahead of an inevitable leak. But the scariest theory is this. Rick and Mike came out not because they were remorseful, but because they had been caught. Whatever the reason, the roots of this tragedy were planted over many years. Watered by ego, fertilized by fame, and left to rot in the darkness of silent betrayal. They were three men who shared a dream, now only two, and one who will never speak again. Frank Fritz's disappearance did not happen with fireworks or flashbulbs. It was not an event that made immediate headlines or dominated the news. It happened quietly, strangely, almost implausibly. One day he was there, scavenging for antiques in storage units and sharing laughs with Mike Wolfe in American Pickers, and then, as suddenly as the dust left on a country lane, he was gone. At first, no one panicked. The star came and went off air, and fans assumed he was on vacation or dealing with personal matters. The official explanation, carefully written and rehearsed, spoke of health challenges and personal time. The network released a bland statement expressing support for Frank and praising his contributions to the show. Mike Wolfe posted a carefully crafted message on Instagram, thanking Frank for the journey, but also noting that they were moving forward. It sounded respectful, mature, and conclusive, but upon closer inspection, cracks in the narrative began to appear almost immediately. The timeline begins in late 2019, when Frank, who had been in and out of rehab for alcohol-related issues, was reportedly hospitalized after a health scare. According to friends, Frank was struggling not only with physical illness, but also with loneliness, depression, and a sense of alienation from the show that had once been his salvation. In early 2020, just before the pandemic took hold globally, Frank returned to the set of American Pickers, but those behind the scenes noticed something different. He was quieter, more reserved. Rumors began to circulate among the crew. Frank was struggling not only with his health, but also with his faith. According to a production assistant, Frank often questioned why Mike and Rick were making outside deals without telling him. He felt left out. The assistant said Frank felt like the walls were closing in. By mid-2020, Frank had practically disappeared from the show. The reason given was back surgery and a lengthy recovery period. But in reality, sources say Frank's absence was not just about his physical health, but also about the tensions that had built up behind closed doors. Calls went unanswered, emails ignored. Old friends who tried to reach Frank said he seemed distant, suspicious, as if he didn't know who to trust anymore. A close friend later told investigators that Frank had confided in him that he had a big secret and was waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Whether that was a genuine statement or just the desperate words of a man who felt abandoned, no one knows for sure. What we do know is that Frank disappeared from public view. There were no further public appearances, no social media updates, No returned calls. Even for a man known for his private life, the silence was unnerving. It wasn't until late 2022 that whispers began to emerge in the darker corners of the internet. Anonymous posts on forums suggested that something terrible had happened to Frank. Some said he had fled the country, others that he was living in isolation, afraid of his old friends. Some even suggested something even darker, that Frank had not left of his own free will. The mainstream media initially ignored these rumors. Without any concrete evidence, they were easily dismissed as conspiracy theories. Behind the scenes, however, a number of journalists began investigating. One of them, a freelance reporter from Iowa, would later reveal that she had been tracking Frank for months, piecing together a timeline that made something clear. Frank had not simply walked away from his life. Something or someone had driven him out of it. In early 2023, police reports quietly made public that a wellness check had been requested at Frank's last known residence. Officers found the house deserted, dusty with unopened letters, the lights still on but no sign of life. A dog barking from a neighbor's yard was the only sound in the house. There were signs of a hasty departure: a half-full coffee mug on the dining room table, a packed but unpacked suitcase, and perhaps most alarmingly, an open folder on the living room sofa containing financial papers and legal correspondence. The documents detail transactions involving antiques deals, real estate sales, and private partnerships between Rick Harrison, Mike Wolfe, and several third parties. Some of the papers show that Frank was being cut out of the profits he helped generate. It is unclear whether he discovered this betrayal before he disappeared, which remains one of the most terrifying mysteries. Investigators later revealed that in the months before his disappearance, Frank made several calls to entertainment attorneys. He seemed to be gathering evidence, preparing to fight back, but he never filed a lawsuit, never went public, never had the chance. By mid-2023, the case had gone cold. No new leads, no official statements, just a haunting absence where a vibrant life once stood. Then came the turning point. The first leaked videos emerged, a few seconds of courtroom footage showing Rick Harrison adjusting his tie, glancing around like a trapped man. Then Mike Wolfe, sitting stiffly next to him, his hands clenched until they turned white. A faint audio clip, barely audible but enough to catch the words, "Frank, it was an accident. We didn't mean to." Concern spread across the internet like wildfire. Fans demanded answers. Media networks rushed to cover the fallout. The court, under mounting public pressure, was forced to confirm that a criminal investigation into Frank Fritz's death was underway and had been going on for months, quietly building a case behind the scenes. When Rick and Mike finally confessed, it was devastating. In their words, what had happened was not premeditated murder, but a nasty confrontation, a heated argument over business dealings, a shove, a fall, a decision to cover up rather than call for help. The details remain hazy, but one thing is clear. They admitted their guilt without coercion. They spoke because deep down, the weight of the truth had become unbearable. Frank's disappearance was no longer a mystery, but a tragedy, one born of betrayal, fear, and the darkest recesses of ambition. As the proceedings continued, more chilling truths emerged. Surveillance footage from nearby streets captured a glimpse of Rick and Mike's car outside Frank's house the night he disappeared. Cell phone records showed they were at the scene. A neighbor reported seeing strange headlights in the driveway, then the sound of an engine revving up and disappearing into the night. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, and with each piece, the portrait that emerged grew more horrifying. Frank Fritz didn't just leave his life behind, it was stripped away bit by bit, friend by friend, until there was nothing left. As we continue, we'll discover what investigators discovered after Frank's body was finally found, and the disturbing evidence that sealed the fate of Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe in the eyes of the law. Because this isn't just a confession, it's a punishment, and it's only just beginning. Long before a confession was whispered in a hushed courtroom, long before the old woman's shocking confessions of Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe went viral, the real story began behind closed doors. The story of Frank Fritz's death was not born in a single moment of tragedy, but over years of tension, betrayal, misunderstanding, and unbridled ambition. To the millions who tuned in every week to watch Rick haggle in Las Vegas or Mike and Frank rummage through America's forgotten backyards, it all seemed like a well-oiled machine. But in reality, the gears had been grinding together for a long time, and behind every smile was a silence thick with resentment. The cracks didn't start out as openly as most blow-ups. They started with small cracks, silent dinners that turned awkward, business meetings that ended early, jokes that weren't as funny as they used to be. And it wasn't just the relationship. Each man had quietly drifted away from the other in his own way. Let's start with Rick Harrison and Frank Fritz. Rick was never officially involved with American Pickers, but industry insiders knew he was deeply invested in building a larger antiques empire. While Pawn Stars focused on the trading side of historical items, Rick had ambitions to expand into discovery shows and hybrid formats. Frank, on the other hand, was very old school. He had little interest in the reality TV, expansion, or empire building that Rick and Mike had begun pursuing. He wanted to travel, talk to real people, find real stories. He once told a friend, "If this is just about money, I'm out." Unfortunately, money is exactly what it became. Sources close to the network confirmed that there were several high-level meetings around 2017 where Rick pitched an idea to combine the Pawn Stars appraisal model with the American Pickers format on the road. Frank was notably absent from these meetings, but Mike Wolfe was not. The two were reportedly formulating a vision where Frank's role would be significantly reduced, if not eliminated entirely. No one can be sure if Frank heard this or simply felt it, but around this time he began to withdraw, first emotionally, then professionally. Frank began missing promotional appearances, reportedly refusing to appear at the station's anniversary events and even pulling out of a major European antiques fair at the last minute. Mike tried to downplay the situation, saying that Frank was focusing on his recovery and needed space. But those close to Frank suspected there was something deeper, a growing bitterness about feeling used, abandoned, and lied to. Mike Wolfe, for his part, was going through his own personal battle. Though he always portrayed himself as an easygoing, motorcycle-loving scavenger with a big smile and a passion for American culture, behind the scenes, Mike was becoming increasingly obsessed with controlling the brand. He launched his own projects, developed a spin-off clothing line, and began courting investors to expand his chain of antique stores across the Midwest. As Frank retreated from the spotlight, Mike went deeper into it on his own. However, it was not just business that divided them, but trust, or rather, the slow erosion of it. Frank was said to have discovered suspicious emails, contracts negotiated without his involvement, promotional campaigns that featured only Mike's image, and a major advertising deal with a private antiques dealer that completely ignored Frank despite using his image. When confronted, Mike was said to have said it was an oversight, but Frank didn't believe it. One of the most pivotal moments. Behind the scenes took place in late 2018 during a joint shoot in Tennessee. The crew recalls the atmosphere being unusually tense. Frank arrived late, barely spoke to Mike between takes, and left without saying goodbye. Later, when the producers reviewed the footage, they noticed that nearly every scene had to be cut because of the tension. Crossed arms, cold eyes, curt answers. Not long after, the crew noticed something else. Frank's scenes were slowly, subtly being eliminated. He was disappearing not just from the screen, but from the very fabric of the show he had helped build. Then came the fallout that no one saw, because it didn't happen on camera. According to a former producer, Frank arranged a private meeting with both Rick and Mike in early 2019. He wanted answers. He wanted to confront his growing unease and get things straight. What happened at that meeting remains a mystery, but after that, Frank wasn't himself. He looked devastated, the producer recalls. Not angry, just broken. Frank reportedly told his sister, "They used me. They got what they wanted, and now I'm trash." Things got worse in 2020. That year, a valuable antique warehouse in Des Moines was sold in a deal brokered by Rick and Mike. The warehouse contained many items that Frank believed belonged to him, collectibles that he had collected, restored, and stored for years. When he learned of the sale, he was furious. He tried to take legal action but was advised against it. The costs would be prohibitive and the burden of proof nearly impossible to meet without paperwork that had likely disappeared by then. This is where the paranoia begins to take root. Frank begins to record everything: phone calls, emails, even in-person meetings. He begins to keep hard drives, notebooks, voice recordings, his own archive of truth. He tells a close friend, "If they try to write me off completely, I'll have proof." Unfortunately, that proof will never be made public the way he would have liked. When the pandemic hit in 2020, production was halted, and Frank officially left American Pickers. The public explanation was health and recovery, but insiders knew better. Frank wasn't just pushed out, he was blacklisted. The network quietly replaced him. Mike moved on. Rick kept his distance. Behind closed doors, Frank's mental health is said to have deteriorated. The isolation, betrayal, and lack of closure pushed him deeper into despair. He became convinced that there was a larger conspiracy to erase his role in the show's history. Whether that belief was well-founded or delusional is debatable, but what is undeniable is how deeply he felt it. In mid-2021, Frank made one last attempt to reach out. He called Mike directly and left a voicemail. The contents of that voicemail were later entered into evidence in court. In it, Frank's voice was hoarse but clear as he said, "I know what you did. I know what Rick did. And if you think you can get away with it, you're wrong. I'm not afraid of either of you. You want war? Fine. Let's go to war." The message was never returned. 2 weeks later, Frank Fritz disappeared. The private war had turned into something else entirely, a silent, irreversible tragedy born of betrayal and hardened egos. No more meetings, No more negotiations, no more reconciliation, just silence, and finally, guilt. Because guilt doesn't always come knocking loudly, sometimes it creeps in slowly, hidden behind the eyes, waiting. That's what prosecutors later suggested when they examined Rick and Mike's mental states before their confessions in court. It wasn't a moment of moral clarity, but years of slow emotional decay, years of knowing what they had done, what they had covered up, and the price they had paid. By the time they finally admitted it, the friendship was long dead, but the truth was alive, and it refused to be buried. There were no cameras allowed in the courtroom. It was not supposed to have the feel of a public execution. Initially, the proceedings were sealed, hidden behind legal barriers and layers of red tape out of public view. The court knew the gravity of the case, the celebrity status of those involved, and the media circus that would follow if even a scrap of video leaked. And yet it happened, as it always does when the story is too big to contain. The first clip appeared quietly, almost too quietly for its brutality. A shaky, blurry 30-second video posted anonymously to a newly created account, with no watermark, no caption, just a timestamp, a date, and a packed courtroom. Rick Harrison sat motionless, his famous bald head bowed slightly, as if the courtroom floor could shield him from the truth he could no longer hide. His face, usually so arrogant and calculating, was pale, his jaw clenched as if he were trying to contain invisible pain. Beside him, Mike Wolfe sat stiff, not calm, but frozen. His hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles felt like they were about to crack through his skin. His eyes were downcast, his shoulders hunched, like a man trying to shrink into himself until he disappeared. The room was silent, except for the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in the crowd. The judge's voice broke the tension, asking the defendants if they had anything else to say. It was a question that was almost ignored, a final formality before the court adjourned for the day. And then Rick spoke without fanfare, without boasting, his voice breaking on the first word, caught between a whisper and a sob. "We did it." There was no scream of horror from the audience, no banging of the gavel, just a stunned silence as Rick choked out the words that would become infamous within hours. "We ended it. Both of us." Mike nodded almost imperceptibly, but the camera caught it. It caught everything. The way his lips trembled, the way his body seemed to collapse under the grim weight of his confession. The video cut off there, but that was enough. Within minutes, it was copied, shared, and analyzed. Social media exploded, news editors rushed to confirm its authenticity, lawyers debated the legality of its release, but none of it mattered to a public desperate for answers. The video was real, the confessions were real, and the consequences were immediate. Media networks cut ties, sponsorship deals fell apart. Their faces, once emblazoned on merchandise, lunchboxes, posters, and collectibles, were pulled from store shelves overnight. A cultural purge began, as if erasing their images could somehow erase the horror of what had been revealed. In the final full video released by the court after the leak went viral, making it impossible to keep the information private, Rick's voice was weak, his hands shaking as he gripped the table in front of him. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. "We argued. It got ugly. Frank, he said things. He threatened to go public. He threatened to take us all down with him. We were panicking. We didn't mean for it to happen." Mike sat staring at the floor, tears streaming silently down his face. "He was our brother," Mike said. "We loved him. but love can't heal fear. The courtroom fell silent as the two reality TV moguls collapsed before their eyes. According to court documents declassified along with the video, Frank was indeed prepared to go public with damaging information regarding Rick and Mike's financial misconduct, the deals that got rid of him, the profits that were embezzled behind his back, the advertising contracts that used his image without his consent. On the night Frank disappeared, Rick and Mike met with him under the guise of reconciliation. They planned to negotiate to appease him, maybe even bribe him to keep quiet. But things got out of hand. Words turned to screams. Screams turned to shoving. A blow was delivered. Frank fell. And when he didn't get up, panic set in. Instead of calling for help, instead of admitting their mistake, they fled. Frank's death was neither swift nor painful. According to medical examiners, the wound that ultimately took his life could have been saved if he had been treated immediately, but no one came. Instead, he was left there alone, betrayed by the people he trusted most. In the leaked video, neither Rick nor Mike tried to blame others. They didn't deny it. They just broke down and admitted it all. The reaction to the leak was swift and devastating. Former colleagues and friends of Frank spoke out in the media, mourning not only his death, but the betrayal of two men they once considered part of their family. Fans held virtual memorials, and antique stores across the country that once proudly boasted of their ties to American pickers and Pawn Stars took down autographed photos and promotional material overnight. The fallout was complete and deserved, but the video left questions. How did things escalate so quickly? Was there a deeper, darker motive? Were there others involved whose names have yet to be revealed? The court proceedings will attempt to answer these questions in the coming months, but for many, the image of Rick and Mike in that courtroom, their faces ravaged, their bodies sagging with guilt, was answer enough. Frank Fritz wasn't just dead. He was silenced, erased, and in that silence, Rick and Mike built their empire higher and higher, richer and richer, until it finally came crashing down on them. This wasn't an accident. This was a betrayal that had been written long before Frank hit the floor. In the next installment, we'll go inside the courtroom, retracing every step of that fateful hearing, minute by minute, witness by witness, uncovering the true story of how a reality TV dream turned into a nightmare broadcast for the world to see. Because the confession may have been captured in a shocking moment, but the truth stretches far deeper than a 30-second clip can reveal. The day of the hearing was overcast, as if even the sky were mourning what was about to happen. Crowds began gathering outside the courthouse hours before dawn, some holding simple signs that read, "Justice for Frank." Others wore old American pickers and Pawn Stars memorabilia that had become symbols of betrayal rather than admiration. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Security doubled and tripled. Reporters crowded the hallways, desperate to catch a glimpse of Rick Harrison or Mike Wolfe. The courtroom itself was sealed off, with only a select few journalists, family members, and court officials allowed in. Telephones and recording devices were banned. At 9 a.m. sharp, the court clerk called the hearing. The judge, a stern woman who had presided over dozens of high-profile cases, took her seat with the dignity reserved for life-changing trials. Her voice was calm, but the weight behind her words was undeniable. Everyone knew this case was different. It was not just about a death. but about the collapse of a legend, the exposure of a darkness hidden behind years of smiles and carefully choreographed handshakes. Rick Harrison entered first, his face pale, his lips pressed into a straight line. The cockiness that had made him a television fixture for more than a decade was gone. In his place was a hollow man, stripped of charm, with only the feeble defenses of a man who knew he had lost everything before the trial began. Mike Wolfe followed close behind. If Rick was a shell, Mike was a contained hurricane. His hands fidgeted, his jaw clenching and unclenching every few seconds. He glanced toward the back of the room where Frank Fritz's family sat, their faces etched with grief and grim determination. The prosecution wasted no time. Their opening statements were cold and impassioned, designed not to be sensational but to present events clearly and ruthlessly. They laid out a timeline, Frank's final days, the financial disputes, the secret meetings, the night of the confrontation. They painted a picture of two men who, faced with the threat of exposure, chose to silence the one man who could have overthrown everything they had built. The defense tried to present the case as a tragic accident, brought on by emotions and years of stress. They portrayed Rick and Mike not as murderers, but as men who made a terrible, irreparable mistake in the heat of the moment. They relied heavily on their clients' clean records, their charity work, and their public image. But the weight of the evidence and confessions was too great for even the most skilled attorneys to overcome. The testimony of witnesses was a major turning point in the trial. The first was a forensic accountant who worked closely with Frank in the final months of his life. She claimed that Frank had discovered serious financial irregularities. Millions of dollars were being funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts without his knowledge or approval. Her testimony revealed a motive that stemmed not just from personal conflict, but also from ruthless financial ambition. Next came Frank's sister. She took the stand, her hands shaking but her voice steady. She read aloud the text messages Frank had sent her in the weeks before his disappearance, filled with fear, betrayal, and a sense of impending doom. "They're going to kill you," one text read. "You know too much." By the time she finished, no one in the room was holding back tears. The prosecution then showed a neighbor's security camera footage of the night Frank disappeared. The image was blurry, not as sharp as a Hollywood movie, but clear enough to make out two figures approaching Frank's house in the darkness. One bald, the other tall and thin. The two defendants sitting silently at the defense table, not daring to look up. Rick's attorney tried to dismiss the footage as circumstantial evidence, but the judge flatly denied the request. As the prosecution's case grew stronger like a rising tide, the defense had one last, risky move left. Let Rick and Mike speak for themselves. It was a gamble, and it failed miserably. Rick was called first. He rose slowly, his steps faltering as he approached an inevitable abyss. After being sworn in, he sat down, and the courtroom fell silent. A reporter's pen scratching on paper in the corner was the only sound. Rick's voice trembled as he recounted that fateful night. He admitted they faced Frank in desperation, driven by anger, pride, and fear. They argued, then fought. And then he spoke the cruelest truth. They had left Frank, wounded and alone, choosing self-preservation over humanity. I just left him there," Rick choked. tears welling in his eyes, his face contorted with remorse. Mike's testimony was even more painful. At first, he couldn't speak. His shoulders shook, his body crumpled under the weight of his guilt. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "We thought if we left, it would stop," Mike said. "But it didn't." It grew, day by day, night by night, until we couldn't live with it. The judge, though stoic, seemed moved by the nakedness of the confessions. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with electricity, seeping through the walls into every crevice. The courtroom sketches that followed captured the moment. Rick and Mike breaking down, confessing not with arrogance but with utter defeat. It was not just Frank Fritz's pain, but the collapse of the public's trust in two men who had been television icons. When the prosecution finished, there was no need for a grand speech. The facts and the confessions spoke for themselves. After a long silence, the judge announced that the case would proceed to full trial on charges of second-degree murder and conspiracy to conceal a death. Bail was denied. Rick and Mike were immediately handcuffed. As they were led away, Rick tried to look back at the Franks, his lips moving but no words came out. Mike bowed his head, as if he could not face the world he had helped destroy. Outside, the crowd gathered not to cheer but to let out a low, misty groan. Some held candles. Others stood still, heads bowed. Frank's family released a brief statement, thanking the public and asking for privacy as they continue to mourn their son, brother, and friend. Somewhere, Frank Fritz is probably watching as the justice he was robbed of begins to be served. The case marks not only the end of two television legacies, but also shakes the way the public views reality entertainment. In the coming days, the charges, potential sentences, and fates of Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe behind bars will continue to be dissected. A justice system often criticized for favoring celebrities has shown itself to be uncompromising. Rick and Mike are no longer stars. They are defendants facing a bleak future, where justice promises to be as brutal, revealing, and unforgettable as what happened in the courtroom. The district attorney, a veteran of many high-profile cases, acted quickly. Within days of the confession, formal charges were filed against Rick and Mike: second-degree murder, conspiracy to conceal a death, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. Additional civil lawsuits quickly arose from Frank Fritz's family and his business partners, alleging years of financial misconduct. The second-degree murder charge carries a maximum sentence of life in prison without parole. The conspiracy charge, if proven, could add decades. For two men in their late 60s, the potential outcome was tantamount to a life sentence, even if they avoided the harshest punishment. Despite the devastating confessions on record, Rick and Mike's defense attorneys immediately went into survival mode. They devised a strategy not to clear their names, an impossible task, but to minimize the damage, to salvage what little freedom remained. Within hours, a press release from the legal team stated that the confessions had been made under emotional stress, without the presence of proper counsel. They argued that Rick and Mike's actions constituted manslaughter, not murder. The distinction was crucial, and could reduce their life sentences by a fraction if they could convince the court. Manslaughter implies carelessness rather than intent, a tragic accident rather than an intentional act. The lawyers painted a picture of two men panicking, frightened, making bad decisions, not cold-blooded killers. They emphasized Rick and Mike's clean records, their charitable activities, and their roles as pillars of their community. Character witnesses were lined up. Former business partners, admirers, even distant relatives, ready to vouch for their integrity. The goal was to bring some humanity to a shattered image after the confession went viral. It was a classic strategy, not to prove innocence but to sow doubt about motive and intent. Meanwhile, prosecutors built their case with ruthless efficiency. They subpoenaed emails, text messages, and financial documents dating back nearly a decade. Search warrants were executed, seizing hard drives, handwritten notes, and safe deposit boxes containing evidence of efforts to cut Frank out of business dealings. The findings painted a damning picture. Several emails between Rick and Mike mentioned concerns that Frank might go crazy if he discovered the extent of the financial manipulation. In one chilling exchange, Mike reportedly wrote, "We need to take him down before he takes us down." Whether that was a figure of speech or an actual plan has become a subject of fierce debate among legal analysts across the country. The case has become increasingly complex, with evidence piling up and legal strategies from both sides honing in on a battle that could shape not only the fates of Rick and Mike, but also how the public views justice in celebrity cases. The obstruction of justice charge stems from actions taken in the immediate aftermath of Frank's death. Surveillance footage, GPS tracking data, and cell phone records show that Rick and Mike were near Frank's home for more than an hour after the confrontation, much longer than they initially claimed. Forensic teams discovered evidence of a cleanup effort inside Frank's home. Surfaces were wiped, hard drives were destroyed, and items crucial to any investigation were missing. The conspiracy charge is more complex, but equally damning. It alleges that Rick and Mike discussed the possibility of silencing Frank in the days before the fateful confrontation. Prosecutors argue that it was not a momentary lapse of temper, but the culmination of growing fear, greed, and resentment. Public opinion was divided, but quickly turned against Rick and Mike. Polls conducted by major networks showed that more than 70% of viewers believed the men deserved the maximum sentence. Fans who once idolized them now flooded social media with angry posts calling for justice, for accountability, for a prison sentence commensurate with the level of betrayal. Rick and Mike's attorneys, however, continued to push their story. They argued that Frank had become increasingly unstable in the months leading up to the incident, citing text messages in which Frank expressed suicidal thoughts. They claimed that Rick and Mike were trying to help Frank, not harm him, and that the tragedy was the result of overwhelming emotions, not a deliberate act. They also alluded to the possibility of a mental health defense, arguing that years of pressure, fame, and the stress of reality television contributed to a mental breakdown that led to the fatal confrontation. Psychologists were called in, some of whom were willing to testify that Rick and Mike suffered from symptoms of anxiety, depression, and PTSD stemming from their years in the spotlight. The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing to determine whether there is enough evidence to proceed to a full jury trial. It's a formality. Everyone knows there is more than enough evidence. The question is not whether Rick and Mike will go to trial, but how bad it will go. Will they turn on each other in a desperate bid for reduced sentences? Will there be more dark secrets revealed, shady business dealings, secret betrayals, perhaps even new crimes lurking beneath the surface? There are whispers of other victims, business partners accused of fraud, antique dealers claiming to have been threatened. Intimidation tactics have been used, with former employees even alluding to a toxic, abusive environment hidden behind the charming smiles on television. If Rick and Mike choose to fight it out, they could drag dozens of others down with them. But there's another possibility: a plea deal. Some legal experts speculate that Rick and Mike's lawyers are seeking a secret deal, offering full cooperation in exchange for a lighter sentence. If they can provide information about others involved or expose larger scandals still hidden from the public, they could avoid life behind bars. But at what cost? Their confessions destroyed their careers, their reputations, and their families. No television network would ever touch them again. No antiques convention would ever welcome them. They became terrifying cautionary tales of how fame, when mixed with unbridled ambition and betrayal, can turn tragic. And looming over them all was the memory of Frank Fritz, a man who loved the open road, who found joy in America's forgotten treasures, who trusted his friends until that trust became his undoing. No matter what legal maneuvers are attempted, no matter how skilled the lawyers or how sympathetic the jurors, one truth can never be erased. Frank is gone, and nothing Rick Harrison or Mike Wolfe can do now can bring him back. In the next installment, we explore the final days of Frank Fritz's life as revealed by investigators. New evidence that emerges, the harrowing details of his final moments, and the chilling portrait of betrayal that investigators have pieced together after months of painstaking work. Because the legal ramifications may have sealed Rick and Mike's fate, but the emotional ramifications, the devastating human cost of their actions, will haunt everyone involved forever. It's often said that hindsight reveals truths we were never ready to face. In the case of Frank Fritz, that old saying has proven painfully true. In the month since Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe's confessions, investigators have painstakingly reconstructed Frank's final days, piecing together a haunting portrait of betrayal, isolation, and a man who knew his world was falling apart faster than he could hold it together. Frank was never a poser. Despite years of national television appearances, he maintained a modest lifestyle. He lived in a house in Iowa, far from the bright lights of Hollywood or Las Vegas. His world revolved around simple pleasures, antique fairs, local diners, motorcycle rides on dirt roads. He was never interested in the fame machine that Rick and Mike had embraced. For Frank, love was always about the pickings, not the foundations. Yet it was that simplicity, that unwavering commitment to authenticity, that perhaps made him a threat to the growing empire that his old friends were so desperate to protect. Investigators discovered that in the last 3 months of his life, Frank had become increasingly paranoid. Numerous calls were made to private investigators. Frank reportedly believed he was being followed. He confided to a neighbor that he thought his phone was being tapped. Some dismissed these concerns as the ramblings of a stressed man. But as new evidence emerged, it became clear that Frank was not imagining things. Security camera footage from local businesses near Frank's home showed strange cars parked near his house at odd hours. Phone records revealed a series of missed calls to Frank's number, originating from disposable phones. Investigators traced at least 2 of these devices to prepaid services purchased in Las Vegas, where Rick Harrison lived. Was this intimidation, surveillance, or a psychological campaign to wear Frank down before he could reveal whatever he had discovered? The evidence points to a calculated effort to keep Frank isolated, frightened, and silent. In his final recorded conversations, voice messages left with a trusted lawyer friend, Frank's tone shifts from defiant to fearful. "I don't think I'm safe anymore," Frank says in one chilling message. I think they're coming for me. I think they have a plan. Despite his fears, Frank pressed on. Investigators found a trove of documents hidden in his home, carefully organized and cataloged: bank statements, real estate deeds, emails outlining business dealings from which he had been excluded. It was a treasure trove of potential evidence against Rick and Mike, enough to not only expose financial wrongdoing, but potentially derail their entire television careers. Frank began drafting letters to networks, sponsors, even federal agencies, intending to denounce what he saw as years of betrayal and fraud, but he never got around to sending them. According to investigators, Frank had scheduled a meeting with a prominent journalist who had exposed corruption in the entertainment industry. The meeting was scheduled for the morning after the fateful confrontation. Frank never showed up. The timeline is brutal in its details. On the evening of his death, Frank was last seen alive around 7 p.m., picking up takeout from a local diner. Surveillance footage shows him smiling at the cashier, carrying a bag of food out into the cool night. Nothing unusual, no signs of fear, no sense that the night would end in tragedy. At around 8:15 p.m., a neighbor's security camera recorded the arrival of two vehicles matching the descriptions of Rick's SUV and Mike's pickup. They parked a short distance from Frank's house and approached his house on foot. At 9:02 p.m., the same camera recorded the two vehicles leaving in a hurry. In the hours that followed, Frank's house remained dark, his food untouched on the kitchen table. His phone rang several times, including from the journalist he had agreed to meet. No one answered. When investigators finally entered the house, the scene was grisly. Signs of a struggle were evident. A knocked-over chair, a broken lamp, a bloodstain visible on the hardwood floor. But disturbingly, there was also evidence of an attempted cleanup. Surfaces had been wiped down. Objects had been hastily rearranged to hide the signs of violence. Forensic analysis later revealed faint traces of both Rick and Mike's DNA on objects throughout the house. The medical examiner's report concluded that Frank died of blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall or assault. The report also stated that if immediate medical attention had been provided, Frank likely would have survived. He did not die instantly. He suffered, he waited, and no one came. The most haunting evidence was found in Frank's living room, a small, broken but recoverable portable tape recorder. On it was a recording of the final confrontation. While some passages are difficult to decipher, some phrases are clear enough to send a chill down the listener's spine. "You think you can destroy us?" A voice identified as Rick's screams, "You're so wrong!" Another voice, Mike's, follows, followed by a scuffle, a loud bang, a long, agonizing silence. The audio ends abruptly. Investigators believe Rick and Mike were unaware the tape recorder was running. It recorded their crimes in real time, sealing their fates long before their confessions in court. Frank's final days were marked not by peace or reconciliation, but by the relentless pursuit of truth by a man who realized too late how much danger he was in. He was not just a victim of violence, he was a victim of betrayal. A man who once believed in a brotherhood of shared dreams turned into a menace that needed to be eliminated. After Frank's death, his family and friends established a foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting victims of betrayal, financial exploitation, and workplace corruption. They vowed that Frank's legacy would not be defined by the tragedy of his death, but by the strength and integrity with which he lived. Meanwhile, investigators continue their work, scrutinizing every aspect of Rick and Mike's business dealings, determined to expose the full extent of their wrongdoing. Because while Frank's final days are over, the fallout for those responsible is just beginning. In the next installment, we'll explore the cultural earthquake caused by Rick and Mike's downfall, how fans, the media, and even former friends reacted to the betrayal, and how once-beloved stars became cautionary tales for a generation. Because when the truth finally emerges, it won't just end two careers, it will change everything. The public reaction to the guilty pleas of Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe was more than outrage, nor was it limited to the typical cycle of scandal and apology that often follows the downfall of high-profile figures. What followed their courtroom collapse was something much larger, much deeper. It was a cultural earthquake, a sudden collective realization that the faces Americans had invited into their homes for more than a decade were capable of unspeakable treachery. Initially, the reaction was disbelief. In the hours after the video was leaked, social media exploded in a frenzy of speculation. Was it really true? Had the video been edited? Were they forced into confessions? Fans desperately clung to the idea that there must have been some mistake. Rick and Mike weren't supposed to be villains. They were supposed to be relatable, approachable, almost family. But as official statements came out, as court documents confirmed the confessions, and as journalists pieced together the ugly truth, denial gave way to devastation. Every major media outlet covered the story. Special segments were devoted to chronicling the rise and fall of Rick and Mike. Longtime fans gave tearful interviews, recounting how much the show had meant to them, how Rick's wit and Mike's enthusiasm had been a comfort in difficult times. Now that comfort has been tainted, that trust shattered. TikTok has become a hotbed for raw emotional reactions. Users post old clips of Pawn Stars and American Pickers, analyzing every glance, every smirk, every small confrontation for signs of hidden darkness. What once seemed like playful banter between friends now takes on a Slavish chai tone. Entire fan accounts once dedicated to honoring the stars have transformed overnight into Frank Fritz memorial pages, mourning a man betrayed by the very people he trusted most. YouTube exploded with commentary videos. Amateur sleuths and professional journalists alike dug into Rick and Mike's past, uncovering long-forgotten lawsuits, whispered allegations of shady business practices, and anecdotes from former employees that described a toxic culture of greed and deceit. These revelations only added fuel to the fire, convincing many that Frank Fritz's death was not a tragic accident, but the inevitable consequence of unchecked ambition. Even Hollywood took notice. Late-night talk show hosts, initially cautious out of respect for the Franks, soon began to mock Rick and Mike in scathing monologues. Satires portrayed the pair as cartoon villains, their once lovable personalities twisted into caricatures of selfishness and cruelty. Reality television, once considered a harmless form of entertainment, faced new scrutiny. Networks rushed to review contracts, vet their stars, and enforce stricter oversight. Major brands that had partnered with Rick and Mike wasted no time cutting ties. Antique malls removed banners featuring their images. Souvenir shops pulled signed items from their shelves. Auctions that once proudly advertised items chosen by Mike Wolfe or appraised by Rick Harrison quietly rebranded, moving as quickly as possible to distance themselves from the scandal. And then there were the personal reactions. Colleagues from the antiquities world expressed grief and anger. Some recalled moments when Frank confided in them about feeling sidelined, about the growing tension behind the scenes. Many admitted that they had dismissed his concerns at the time, assuming it was the normal friction of a long-term partnership. Now they grapple with regret, wondering if they could have done something, said something, to prevent the tragedy. No matter where the debate goes, one fact remains undeniable. The betrayal was not just personal but cultural, a breach of trust between celebrities and the public that left deep scars. Frank Fritz's story became iconic, a cautionary tale about loyalty, ambition, and the human cost of unchecked ego. His image, once quietly resting alongside Mike's on old DVD covers, now stands alone, a reminder of the cost when friendship is sacrificed on the altar of greed. Meanwhile, Rick and Mike sat in suspense, their public silence only deepening public anger. Legal experts speculated about their chances at trial, but in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already out. Thank you for following along to the end of this journey to uncover these shocking secrets. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more thrilling stories. We'll be back with more shocking truths. See you in the next videos.